Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Brentwood Family Fellowship. Great message, I tell you. Kind of makes you think, doesn't it? Coronavirus, a crown. Well, as I said a while ago, we've been going through talking about the book of Daniel before Easter showed up, and we celebrated that time by talking about the resurrection for 2 different weeks. And now here's some good news. Next Sunday is May the 3rd, I think, isn't that right? And next Sunday we're going to be in that building. And so y'all are welcome to come and worship with us. When we get there, everybody stay 6 feet apart. There's plenty of room in there to spread out. And we're going to celebrate the joy of the Lord together. So we invite y'all to come next week. Well now, since I'm going back to talking about the book of Daniel after taking a 2-week hiatus, or however you say that, I guess I better go back and review you just a little bit and let you know what the book of Daniel's all about. First of all, it's a book of history. It's a book of history during a time when the children of Israel were basically in captivity. Some of them had been taken away to Babylon. Others were still back in Jerusalem. They were scattered. They were defeated. And the reason they were defeated, the reason they were scattered is because God was trying to get their attention. So many times He's had to do that with them. And we can shake a finger at them and say, you silly people, why don't you get it? Well, we need to look in the mirror because we're the same silly people who don't always get it. And God has to discipline us. He has to get us back on the right path. He's got to show us the error of our ways. He has to remind us again and again and again. And so that's what the book of Daniel is really all about. It's about the sovereignty and the power of God. It's about our poor, limited memory, our lack of understanding, our need to be disciplined. And you can see that the children of Israel have been taken into captivity and they're being disciplined by a sovereign God. That is what Daniel is about. Daniel's trying to let us know God has got this under control. He had it under control before I was born. He has it controlled during my life. He'll have it under control when I am long gone and when certain events are taking place that He's given me information about. And by the way, He shared that information with us, and we'll get to that in the coming weeks. But this week, we're in chapter 5 of Daniel. Chapter 5 of Daniel. Now, I want you to remember, I told you that Daniel's a little bit different book. It is not at all in chronological order. Not only that, it starts out in Hebrew, and then it changes to Aramaic. So the people who interpreted had to switch languages. They were interpreting the scriptures and giving it to us in English. Now, I know Lance and some other friends of mine think that Jesus carried a King James Bible with Him. That's all well and good. I want you to understand the King James Bible didn't come to be until 1,620 years after Jesus died on the cross. So Jesus didn't carry a King James Bible. Matter of fact, He didn't carry any Bible because the New Testament hadn't been written yet. But He knew the Torah, He knew the law, He knew the prophets, and he quoted them and did it very clearly and made perfect sense. Why? Because He was the incarnation of God. The sovereign, mighty God that had allowed Israel to go into captivity was born in Bethlehem. And we celebrate His birth, we celebrate His resurrection. And today I want you to understand, God is all-powerful. He is all-knowing. He is sovereign. He is in control no matter what's going on around us. He's going to bring everything to its appropriate end. And Jesus Christ is going to be lifted up and glorified. We need to understand that. And that's what Daniel's trying to tell us. He's telling us about what's going to happen 600 years before any of it happens. He interpreted a dream in chapter 2. First in chapter 1, he showed his obedience by refusing the food at the king's table. In chapter 2, he interpreted a king for the king Nebuchadnezzar. He interpreted a dream and told him about kingdoms that were coming in the near future. And we see going through chapter 3 and chapter 4, we see the king humbled and disciplined. Why in the world would God discipline King Nebuchadnezzar? That's because God had called him out. God had anointed him. God had put him in place, and He was using him as His instrument to discipline His people. But when he forgot God, And he forgot all the lessons he had learned. He had seen Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the burning fiery furnace. He had seen the Son of God walking with them in the flames, and nobody was hurt. God had to get his attention again. And after all this, you'd think Nebuchadnezzar and his family would finally know and understand what God was about. But no, the rest of the family didn't get it. Some of them did, but not all of them. So we left off in chapter 4 when we stopped this and started talking about the resurrection. With Nebuchadnezzar finally coming to his senses, being restored to his kingdom. He was separated from his kingdom. He found himself running around with the animals and eating grass like a wild ox, and his fingernails growing like the nails of an eagle or something. His hair long like feathers. And it says, we saw God disciplined him and brought him back to his sanity. Brought him back to his sanity. See, that's something people don't understand. The Bible says the fool has said in his heart there is no God. But fools despise wisdom and instruction, don't they? So many people go through life thinking they've got it all figured out, they've got a good handle on it, they know and understand it all. But let me tell you, folks, we don't really get it until we come in contact with the living and the risen Lord. So we learned that it was foolish, crazy to think that he didn't need God and to think that he succeeded on his own. Look at all the stuff I've done. Look at all the stuff I've built. There are a lot of people running around like that today, folks. Everybody's wanting to take credit for what they've done, not realizing if they do anything, it is by the grace of God. Now, I've told you, over the last couple of years, that I've worked hard to lose some weight. And I've lost about 170 pounds. And I want you to know how I did that. By the grace of God, in his strength, by his power, with his help, and for his glory. And without him, I couldn't have done it. Without him, I couldn't maintain it. Without him, I couldn't have got up this morning and run over 6 miles. But see, God makes all that possible if you trust him and you put yourself in his hands. So, what did Nebuchadnezzar finally learn? Chapter 4, last week, the last verse, verse 37. Nebuchadnezzar said, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and glorify the King of heaven, because all his works are true, and his ways are just. He is able to humble those who walk in pride. That's what he'd been doing. He'd been walking in pride. All around the world today, there are people walking in pride. You may be one of them. I have to check myself every moment to make sure it's not one. I'm not one. If we walk in pride, God will find a way to humble us and to get our attention, to discipline us, and to remember that God is sovereign. We're not. God is all-powerful. We're not. God is in control. We're not. One of the things, I like the Serenity Prayer from Alcoholics Anonymous. God grant me the serenity to accept the things that cannot change. And yet at that point I had to say, wait a minute. What can I change? What can I control? I can't change or control anything without God's power, without God's presence, without God's praise, grace. I need him every hour, like the song that we sang a few minutes ago. Oh, how I need him. We all need God. Well, Nebuchadnezzar forgot that. He found himself out wandering around behind the little animals, didn't he? Out, eating grass like an ox, till his hair grew like eagle's feathers. And he finally said, now, I, Nebuchadnezzar. I want you to notice something about that. Something else I pointed out as we're studying the book of Daniel. So Daniel's not always the one talking. Sometimes he is taking dictation, and that's what he did in chapter 4. So this makes this a different book than a whole lot of other books in the Bible. But he's going along and he's talking. All of a sudden, he is telling you what Nebuchadnezzar had to say. And so, direct quote, I, Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar didn't write this, Daniel did. But he got it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. I praise, exalt, and glorify the King of heaven, because all his works are true, and his ways are just. He is able to humble those who walk in pride. He's able to do a lot of things, isn't he? Lance just read a verse out of Ephesians, one of my favorite. He is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or even think. Isn't that amazing? So, the king, when he came to this point, his kingdom was restored. And when we come to chapter 5, he is missing. He's just gone. Doesn't say, The last words that come out of his mouth are verse 37, I praise, I exalt, I glorify the King of heaven. And then in chapter 5, he is gone. Doesn't tell us what happened to him. We assume he died. But see, Daniel left some things out. That's another thing. He's telling you history, but he's not telling all the history. He's just telling you history that shows, that demonstrates the power and the glory of God. It's not about men. It's not about these kings. It's not even just about the future. It's about the power, the glory, the sovereignty of God. John Walford wrote in his book, Every Prophecy of the Bible, when Nebuchadnezzar died in 562 BC, his son Evil Merodach succeeded him. He was assassinated by Neriglissar after reigning 2 years. So, Nebuchadnezzar died. His son took over. He got assassinated, and another guy took over. Neriglissar occupied the throne for 4 years until he died and was succeeded by his son. So there's 1, 2, 3. 3 different people that are ruling over Babylon. Now his name's so hard to pronounce, I'm not even going to try. But here's the 4th one. He was only a child and he occupied the throne for 9 whole months. Just a child occupied the throne for 9 months until he was beaten to death by a group of conspirators who made Nabonidus the king of Babylon. So let's count them up now. Nebuchadnezzar died, then there was Merodach, and then Neriglissar, and he died, and then his son, and then Nabonidus. So there's 4 different rulers in Babylon. You think there was time for them to forget about the sovereignty and the power and the glory of God and his need to be exalted? Absolutely. Well, when we jump into chapter 5, we read about a king named Belshazzar. Well, where in the world did he come from? You know, there are a lot of liberal scholars over the years that thought Belshazzar didn't even exist, that somebody just made him up. But you know, one of the funny things about the Bible, it's not funny, it's a glorious thing, is that every once in a while, archaeologists make a discovery. And when they make this discovery, everybody's looking for something to prove the Bible wrong, but you know what happens? The evidence always proves the Bible right. And so many years ago, they discovered something that they called the cylinder of Nabonidus. And when they began to interpret what was in this cylinder, they discovered that it mentioned somebody by the name of Belshazzar. See, everybody's been saying he doesn't exist, he's not real. Daniel just made this guy up. No, he existed, he was real, and he ruled as a co-regent with Nabonidus. Now Nabonidus was actually the king, and Nebuchadnezzar was mainly just in charge of the town, the city of Babylon. And so here he is. We know that Nabonidus ruled from 556 to 539 BC. He appointed Belshazzar as co-regent in 553 BC, and he basically just ruled the city of Babylon because Nabonidus lived somewhere else. He didn't want to stay there. He lived somewhere else. So that brings us to chapter 5, and let's read that. Chapter 5, verses 1 through 3. King Belshazzar held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine in their presence. He is partying down. He's having a good time. He's feeling pretty good about himself. And so look at verse 2. Under the influence. 3 words that are very important. Under the influence of the wine, Belshazzar gave orders to bring in the gold and silver vessels that his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, wives, and concubines could drink from them. They're having a far-out time. They just think they've got the world by the tail. And Belshazzar's drunk. He said, well, my dad collected some stuff. Wouldn't it be cool if we could just drink out of this and we could praise our gods? So he was drunk, having a good time. He was under the influence. And he didn't give a rip about God or anything God had done. He'd forgotten everything that his father had discovered. Remember the last words out of his father's mouth? I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, glorify the King of heaven. Not Belshazzar. He'd forgotten all of that. So verse 3 of Daniel chapter 5. So they brought in the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem. And the king and his nobles, wives and concubines, drank from them. They drank the wine and praised their gods with a little g. Their gods made of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. I want you to think about that. People still have gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, don't they? They bow down before them. They pray to them. They have statues. They have pictures. They have portraits. They have all sorts of things that they can look at, and they think that somehow brings them closer to God, and they are just idols. It's really sad that in the year of our Lord, 2020, people are still idolaters. You know, he was a far cry from his father, wasn't he? Apparently, with all his father had endured, Belshazzar hadn't learned a thing. He hadn't been paying attention. Hopefully, and we'll find, somebody in the household was paying attention. He didn't know God. He was drunk. He was an idol worshiper. We say, wow, all this, that's terrible, that's terrible. You know what, folks? He's not so much different than you and I. So we're not always in control of our functions, are we? And sometimes we get a little crazy. And sometimes we forget God. But I want you to know, there is a God who is able to discipline his people. He's able to get your attention and to bring you back. And do not be deceived, the Bible says. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. There's a payday someday, isn't there? Well, let's look at verses 5 through 6 of Daniel chapter 5. He's worshiping his gods of gold and silver and bronze and iron and wood and stone, and it says, at that moment, the fingers of a man's hand appeared and began writing on the plaster of the king's palace next to the lampstand. As the king watched the hand that was writing on the plaster, his face turned pale, and his thoughts so terrified him that his hip joints shook and his knees knocked together. Now, do you get that picture? Can you see that? His knee, he's just wobbling all over. He's shaking. His knees are knocking together. It's a pretty vivid picture, isn't it? He sees a man's hand appearing right on the plaster walls of the palace. It's writing something, but he doesn't know what it is. But he can see it, and he is terrified. Now, he's drunk, but he ain't that drunk. He knows something's wrong. So here's the question. Is he going to call on God? No. Because he still hadn't learned anything, just like so many of us. We go everywhere else and we save God as a last resort. So we're not so much different than Belshazzar, are we? Verse 7 of chapter 5. The king called out to bring in the mediums, the Chaldeans, the astrologers. He said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this inscription and gives me its interpretation will be clothed in purple, have a gold chain around his neck, have the third highest position in the kingdom. So all the king's wise men came in, but none of them could read the inscription or make its interpretation known to him. Then King Belshazzar became even more terrified. His face turned pale, and his nobles were bewildered. That's a bad situation, isn't it? He doesn't know where to turn. He's lost as a goose. He needs some advice, and he doesn't know where to turn. He's called in the best advisors that he knows of. That's what we do a lot of times, don't we? We listen to everybody else, but we don't listen to God. He turned white as a sheet, folks. He's shaking all over. He didn't know where to turn. Enter the queen. I want you to know this queen. We have no idea who she was. We don't know if this was his wife. We don't know if this was his father's wife or his father's daughter, his sister. don't know, because it doesn't tell us, but we know she was the queen, she was a part of the household, and she knew something about what had happened to Belshazzar's father. She'd apparently seen some things, and she knew some things, and let's look at that. Daniel 5, verses 10 through 12. Because of the outcry of the king and his nobles, the queen came to a banquet hall. Notice she wasn't there. She wasn't taking part in the drunken orgy. She was somewhere else, but she could hear him crying. She could hear him whining. She probably heard it before. Now, how does she greet him? She greets him in a way that a lot of kings and queens still want to be greeted. You hear this a lot of times. May the king live forever. I got news for you. There's only one king who lives forever, and that's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Belshazzar's going to die, and he just doesn't know how soon. Every earthly king is going to die. They just don't know when, how, why, or sometimes even by whose hand. But she greets him. May the king live forever, she said. Don't let your thoughts terrify you, or your face be pale. There's a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the days of your predecessor, he was found to have insight, intelligence, and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods. Your predecessor, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the diviners, mediums, Chaldeans, and astrologers. Your own predecessor, the king, did this because Daniel, the one the king named Belteshazzar, was found to have an extraordinary spirit, knowledge and perception, and the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems. Therefore, summon Daniel, and he will give the interpretation. Isn't that interesting? He'd forgotten all that if he ever knew it. And she's saying, Daniel called him Belteshazzar. Now, why did he call him Belteshazzar? Well, he was trying to honor his own god, Bel. And you see his son's name is Belshazzar. Pretty close to Belteshazzar, isn't it? They're almost the same, just a little bit different. Let's look at verses 13 through 16 now. Then Daniel was brought before the king. The king said to him, Are you Daniel, one of the Judean exiles that my predecessor the king brought from Judah? I've heard that you have the spirit of the gods in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, extraordinary wisdom. Now the wise men and mediums were brought before me to read this inscription and make its interpretation known to me. But they could not give me its interpretation. However, I have heard about you that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Therefore, if you can read this inscription and give me its interpretation, you will be clothed in purple, have a gold chain around your neck, have the third highest position in the kingdom. As always, Daniel wasn't interested in the reward. He didn't care about the gold. He didn't care about the position. He didn't care about any of the things that were being offered to him. He just cared about honoring and glorifying and exalting the name of God. Glorifying him. So that's what he said to him. Daniel 7:21. Then Daniel answered the king, You may keep your gifts and give the rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription for the king and make the interpretation known to him. Your Majesty, the Most High God gave sovereignty, greatness, glory, and majesty to your predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar. Did you get that? It took Nebuchadnezzar a while to figure that out. But in the 37th verse of chapter 4, he makes it very clear that he was where he was because of the grace of God. Now, I want you to know something, folks. We are all where we are today because of the grace of God. It's not in our own strength. It's not by our wisdom. It's not by our mind. Not by our power. Not by our understanding. It's by the grace of God that we are where we are. We need to glorify him. We need to exalt his name. So let's read the rest of this. Because of the greatness he gave it, all peoples, nations, and languages were terrified and fearful of him. He killed anyone he wanted and kept alive anyone he wanted. He exalted anyone he wanted. He humbled anyone he wanted. But when his heart was exalted and his spirit became arrogant, he was deposed from his royal throne and his glory was taken from him. That's what we read about in chapter 4. Actually, he dictated it to Daniel. Verse 21. He was driven away from the people. His mind was like an animal's. He lived with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like cattle. His body was drenched with the dew from the sky until he acknowledged that the Most High God is ruler over the kingdom of men and sets anyone he wants over it. Folks, you think it's important to acknowledge that? To acknowledge the fact that God is the ruler over the kingdom of men, and he sets anyone he wants over it. You know, we may gripe and we may complain about our rulers, but guess who's responsible for putting them there? It's God who calls them out and puts them there. God can give us a really good one, or he can give us a really bad one. But whoever he gives us the one he wants us to have. Sometimes we get what we want, not understanding what we want is not what we need. So just think about that when you're complaining about the government. So verses 22 through 24 now. But you, his successor, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. So apparently he did know it, but he had forgotten, hadn't he? Just like all of us, it's so easy to forget. Instead, you've exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven. The vessels from his house were brought to you, and as you and your nobles, wives, and concubines drank wine from them, you praised the gods made of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see, or hear, or understand. But you have not glorified the God who holds your life breath in his hand, and who controls the whole course of your life. Therefore, he sent the hand, and this writing was inscribed. Think it's important for us to acknowledge God in our lives? Think it's important for us to think about him? Think prayer is important? Absolutely. You can't walk in the light of God's glory if you don't continue to talk to him. That's what prayer is. It's about talking to God, communicate with him. You can't tell God anything he doesn't already know. But he wants to have a relationship with you. He wants you to tell him your troubles. He wants you to tell him your victories. And when you tell him your victories, understand something. They're not your victories. He gave you the strength, the power to overcome whatever problem you were facing. When you find yourself in desperate need, he's the one who can lift you up and bring you out. He's able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that you ask or even think. It always reminds me of Star Wars episode where Han Solo's wanting to know about his reward. And Luke Skywalker says to him, "The reward's more than you can imagine." And Han answers, "I can imagine quite a lot." That's all of us. We can imagine quite a lot, but I have not seen, ear hath not heard, neither hath entered into the heart of man the things that God has prepared for those that love him. We can't even imagine what God's got for us. But we need to trust him, and we need to walk in faith, walk in his light. So verses 25 through 28. This is the writing that was inscribed. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. This is the interpretation of the message. Mene means that God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Folks, you listen to that, that is past tense. He has numbered and he has brought it to an end. It's over with. It's done. Now, there was a country song years ago that had a line in it, "I see the writing on the wall." And I want you to understand something, folks. People still don't understand the handwriting on the wall. If you see the handwriting on the wall, it is too stinking late. You have already missed out. There is no hope. It's over. It's done. The clock has run out. And here's what he's going to tell him. The interpretation of the message. Mene means God has numbered the days of your kingdom, and he has brought it to an end. Tekel means that you have been weighed in the balance and found deficient. King James says, you have been weighed in the balance and found wanting. Because you come up short. You don't have what it takes. You've made the last mistake you're ever going to make because God is sick and tired of it. He's not going to take any more. 28, Paris means that your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So we've had all these different rulers after Nebuchadnezzar. Finally, Belshazzar is introduced in chapter 5, and he is kicked out before chapter 5 is over. That's a short reign. It may not be a short reign, but it doesn't take Daniel long to tell you about it. But he's not telling you about Belshazzar. He's telling you about the glory and the power and the sovereignty of God. That's something the world just doesn't get. God is sovereign. He's over all. He lets a lot of things happen. He lets us do what we want to do. He's big enough to do that. But each and every one of us is going to have to give account of everything we've ever done. You know, the Bible says we're going to have to give an account of every idle word. Wow, that scares me. Thank God for grace. Thank God for the shed blood of Jesus Christ that cleanses me from all sin. Without that, I would have no hope. And I would truly be dead. So let's look at verse 29 now. After he told him that the kingdom was divided, given to the Medes and the Persians. Verse 29, then Belshazzar gave an order. He's feeling pretty good about himself. He got the interpretation. He doesn't understand that it's already done. It's a done deal. Here's what he says. Belshazzar gave an order, and they clothed Daniel in purple, placed a gold chain around his neck, and issued a proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. He wasn't a very good listener, was he? Daniel said, I don't care about your reward. Give them to someone else. I don't want it. He told him he'd keep the gifts. But he did it anyway. He is so glad to hear it. He probably thought, okay, God's giving me a warning. I mean, he took my father's throne away from him, took him out into the wilderness, made him, eat with the animals, and he was wet with the dew of heaven, and his hair grew long, and his fingernails grew long, and yet God restored him. Maybe he was hoping for that, but that's not what Daniel said. He said, you're weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So look at the last two verses of Daniel chapter 5. That very night, Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was killed. That very night. Sometimes God's judgment comes quickly. Sometimes it takes a while. But be assured of this. It's going to happen. Each and every one of us is going to have to give account of what we've done in our life. God loved us so much that he sent his son to die on a Roman cross to pay the penalty for our sin. He was buried in a borrowed tomb. He borrowed it because he didn't need it for very long. And on the third day, he rose from the dead. Then for about 40 days, he appeared to over 500 people. Walked with them, talked with them, ate with them, showed that he was in a normal body. But not a normal body like we have, a glorified body. Because he could appear and disappear at will. He could walk through walls. He could just show up in a room with all the doors being locked. And they watched him as he ascended into heaven. And they're all just staring at him, staring at the sky. And an angel had to appear and say, ye men of Galilee, why are you standing here gazing up into the heavens? This same Jesus will come again in like manner as you have seen him go. They had to be told to quit staring into the sky. There are a lot of people still want to stare in the sky. Verse 31. That night Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom at the age of 62. Now, Darius wasn't such a bad guy, but he was also chosen and anointed by God. He was contemporary with guys like Ezra and Nehemiah and Jeremiah, these prophets. He allowed them to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple, to rebuild the wall, didn't he? So God put somebody else there that would do what he wanted, that would give him glory, that would honor him, unlike Belshazzar. I want to tell you something. You can honor God, you can glorify Him, you can exalt Him, or God can find somebody who will. You can go where He wants you to go, you can do what He wants you to do, you can say what He wants you to say, or God can find somebody who will. Choices you'll make. He knows what choices you'll make. Bottom line, if you see the handwriting on the wall, it is too stinking late. It's too late for redemption. If you die without Jesus, it's just too late. So here's the question. Do you know Him? Have you put yourself in His hands? Do you trust Him? Are you willing to follow Him? Are you willing to be obedient to His will for your life? Or do you say, okay, God, if I need you, I'll call you? Well, that's kind of Belshazzar. All he wasn't even thinking, if I need you, I'll call you. He didn't know who to call on until the queen showed up and pointed out to him. He may not know either. But here's the thing. There is a God in heaven. And by grace, through His love and His infinite mercy, He sent Jesus to die on the cross in your place, in my place, because we have all sinned and come short of the glory of God. And we've earned something through that, just the way Belshazzar earned what happened to him. We've all earned death. The wages of sin is death, but the gift of God's eternal life. See, God wants to give us a gift that we can receive by grace through faith, because that's the way we're saved, folks. By grace through faith, Ephesians 2:8-9. Say, for by grace you saved through faith, that not of yourselves, not of works, lest any man should boast. For we are His workmanship, it's verse 10, okay? For we are His workmanship, created unto good works, which He has before ordained that we should walk in them. God's plan is for us to walk in good works. Now we can do that or not. Belshazzar learned a lesson, but it was too late. His father, Nebuchadnezzar, learned a lesson, and there was time for redemption. See, sometimes there's time for redemption, sometimes there's not. And here's the thing. Nebuchadnezzar didn't know. Belshazzar didn't know. Nobody knows when the time is up, but God does. Folks, don't wait for the writing on the wall. What will you do with Jesus? If you're here today and you've never asked Jesus Christ to come into your heart, I invite you to do that. I invite you to honestly and humbly pray, saying, Father, I know that I've sinned, and I need your forgiveness. I want to receive Jesus Christ as my Savior and follow Him as Lord. Well, the moment you pray that prayer, we have the assurance in God's Word that whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. So you can know you have eternal life. But here's the deal. You're not saved to sit. You're saved to serve. You're saved to carry on the work that God puts before you. See, you're saved to live a new life. That's why it says we are buried with Christ in baptism. We are raised to walk in newness of life. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become, not some things, all things have become new. Has everything become new for you in your life? Or are you just going through life doing business as usual? That's where a lot of folks are. That's where I found myself from time to time, and I had to repent. I had confessed to God. That's a good news. It's like to use 1 John 1:9. Let's use 1 John 1:8 and 9. 1 John 1:8 starts out, it says, if we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. So that's something the world doesn't understand. I'm thinking, well, what have I done wrong? How have I sinned? Why do I need God? Truth is, we have all sinned and come short of His glory. So if we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. But here's the good news, verse 9. If we confess our sins, He is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Now, I've heard people talking about the injustice and the inhumanity of the cross, the cruelty of it, the sadness of it. And yet, for some reason, we call that day Good Friday. There wasn't anything good about it for Jesus. But we call it, why do we call it Good Friday? We call it Good Friday because God sent the one and only one who could ever be good enough to die on the cross to pay the penalty for your sin and for mine. And people say it was an injustice. It was a sham trial. It was completely, they broke all these laws and all these rules, and that's correct, they did. They broke all kinds of rules and all kinds of laws in order to get Jesus to the cross. But it was justice, folks. It was justice. Justice was carried out on the cross. You see, when Jesus died on that cross, God laid on him all the sin of the world. Your sin, my sin, everybody's sin was all laid on Jesus at that moment in time. That's what we said. Jesus paid it all. In fact, that's what he said as he hanged on the cross. He said, it is finished. He literally said, paid in full. It's over. It's done. There's nothing else left to do. It's accomplished. Completed. Wow. That's amazing. And God sent his son in the world to die on the cross. Because me. Because of you. Jesus didn't pay for any sins of himself. He was without sin. Even the thief on the cross knew that. So understand you've sinned. Father, I know I've sinned. Sorry for it. I want to receive Jesus Christ as my Savior and follow his word. Trust that God answered. I had a friend years ago that was talking about getting saved. He said, I just don't feel any different. I prayed that prayer. I did this. I did that. I said, what you need to do more than anything else is you need to believe what God has said. Just believe it. It doesn't have anything to do with how you feel. It doesn't have anything to do with how you act. It has to do with the sovereignty of God and what God has done. So when you call on the name of the Lord, believe what he says. Whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Take him at his word. After all, without faith, it's impossible to please God. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this glorious, beautiful, wonderful day. We thank you, Father, as we're looking forward to next week to being back into the building. But it's not about the building, folks. Father, we know it's about the folks. It's about your people. It's about your family that you've called out. Help us, Father, to be the salt and light in this community. Help us to always remember to lift up, exalt, glorify the King of Heaven, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, to glorify you, Father. To glorify your Son, Jesus Christ, and to glorify your Spirit. We just pray now that you go with us and guide us and bless everyone who's here and let them feel your peace. Yet, Father, if they're rebelling against you, if they're trying to live life without you, don't let them feel peace. Draw them back to you. Don't give up, Father. Give them another chance. In Jesus' name.